Hello and welcome to our panel. My name is Hannah Thompson and I am on the content publishing team at Nexus Marketing and I'm your moderator for today's panel. Today we'll be talking about best practices for data management and analysis. And as usual, before I introduce our panelists and we jump into this topic, I'll do a little bit of an introduction to NXUnite, which is made in partnership with Nexus Marketing. It's a community resource for the mission-driven industry. The NXUnite mission is to make introductions that lead to lasting relationships and to serve as a hub for connection in the mission-driven sector. As you just saw in our video, on NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, cause-driven podcasts, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks with me today. Today, our panel will be about an hour long and will include both time for questions prepared by my team and questions from you all, our audience. So at any time, including right now, if you have any panels, feel free to go ahead and submit those via the question tab, and we will cover them at kind of toward the second half of the panel. But go ahead, start putting those into the question tab. If you're having any technical difficulties or any logistics questions, my team member Anton Duran will be in the chat as NXUnite team username, ready to do his best to assist. And then finally, before I introduce today's panelists, just want to thank all of you for attending our panel today. This panel will be recorded and accessible to both current audience members and people who register to watch it after the live panel is over. We're so excited that you're here, and we're really appreciative of all of the work that you do. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and excited to learn with you all from these outstanding experts who I will now introduce. Brian Lacey, data consultant at NPO Info. Brian Lacey is a data consultant for NPO Info and principal of Brian Lacey and Associates, a fundraising and data services firm with more than 30 years of experience leading industry resources and veteran talent to maximize opportunities across the giving spectrum. With expertise in the North American market and connections across the philanthropic landscape, he and his team have worked from higher education to healthcare to religious and community charities and have created fundraising programs regardless of the size of the team or budget. From annual giving solutions to major and principal giving strategies, they've helped more than 400 nonprofits raise more than $1 billion in philanthropic support. Sheri Chaney Jones, founder and president at SureImpact. Sheri Chaney Jones is the founder and president of SureImpact. A researcher and expert in social impact measurement, she believes in data, metrics, and accountability. Furthermore, Sheri is a thought leader in the public sector evaluation and applied organizational research. She is the author of Impact and Excellence, Data-Driven Strategies for Aligning Mission, Culture, and Performance in Nonprofit and Government Organizations. Sheri is passionate about women's equity and the advancement of girls. She is the Columbus chapter president of the National Association of Women Business Owners and a commissioner for the City of Columbus. Chris Boyette, account executive at Alumni Finder. Chris has more than a decade of experience in the higher education and nonprofit spaces, having served clients at Target Analytics, a division of Blackbaud, Wealth Engine, and now Alumni Finder. Chris has expertise in predictive analytics and wealth screening, and he is particularly passionate about helping nonprofits make more informed strategic fundraising decisions that increase donor revenue and retention. Chris is a subject matter expert in harnessing the power of data and analytics to improve fundraising results. He has spoken at industry conferences, user groups, and seminars. Chris graduated from the University of Arkansas. Aaron Rodriguez, executive director at Root Cause. Aaron Rodriguez serves as the executive director for Root Cause, a nonprofit consulting team that helps drive enduring and effective social change. Before coming to Root Cause, she spent 14 years at Youth Build USA, serving last as the chief quality officer. At Youth Build USA, Aaron served in many roles, including as a trainer and facilitator of measurement, learning, and improvement initiatives designed to make data a central part of creating change. We're so excited to have all of you, and now I'm going to dive into our first question. So Brian, I'll start with you. How has data management changed over the last few years? And just in your words, why is it so important for us to be having this conversation? Why is data important for nonprofit organizations?
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. Well, I think a lot of things have changed, and of course a lot of things have remained the same, but one of the things that has changed is there's such a tremendous amount of information now. And nonprofits are getting better and better and better at using it, which I'm excited about. Whether it be wealth screening data, whether it be behavioral data, we're now learning that we need to focus even more our resources. So, and that can be done. Segmentation is more and more powerful if you know more about households. So I think, most nonprofits or many nonprofits have now been exposed to the fact that you can probably identify the people in your database more likely to increase gifts if you ask them for increases. You can identify potentially within your database groups of people that are unlikely to ever become a major gift donor based on their capacity, based on behavioral things that you can identify in their profile. And that can just help you focus your resources. And as we get more and more competitive and things get tougher and tougher at nonprofits, it's very challenging to do everything with everyone we'd like to. So we have to focus, we have to segment. And so I'm just excited to see nonprofits using so much more data.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, there's so much available out there, but being really intentional about what is important for your organization makes such a difference. All right, Sheri, how do you think data management has changed over the past few years, and why is data important for nonprofit professionals to consider?
Sure. Thank you, Hannah. And what I love about this particular panel is we have both the donor relation data side and then the mission impact data side. And I think for a long time, the sector has been focused on donor data, fundraising data. But what I'm excited about and what's been changing is this shift to also thinking about mission metrics and how do we prove that we really are creating the change in lives and circumstances of those that we serve. And I think a lot of why this has changed is that technology has evolved. I've been in the program evaluation impact measurement space for over 20 years. And when I started, it was only available for the really large with the ability to hire, expensive consultants or full-time staff to do this type of work. But not only are funders requiring it, specifically our millennial donors are asking, what's your impact? Because they don't understand a world where you don't know the impact of what you do because of technology. And so I'm excited just about the shift to understanding that using data in your organization is not just about fundraising and donor data, but it's also about impact and social impact measurement.
Yeah, I love that, Sheri. I think particularly you mentioned how millennials are really hungry for that impact data. I love that we're using data that we know about our donors to know when's going to be the most impactful to share that impact data, and just kind of how the data from different sides is talking to each other. I love that. All right, Chris, how has data and analytics changed over the past few years, and why is data important for nonprofit organizations?
So this is a question that I was interested to hear what everybody else's take was, and mine is similar to what Brian mentioned. And Sheri, I like where you went with that as well. But I mean, it's so much more data to manage than it was last year. You go back 5 years, you just have much more data with everything from digital marketing, social, emails. Obviously you keep the giving. I mean, there's just so much information that you have to manage that. If it is even, it's even more crucial that they have a rigorous management program so that the data is actually usable and you can make sense of it. Because when you have it and it's accurate, it can tell you exactly what you need to do. Like, it can point you to the right people. There's so much data that I recommend to manage what you can manage and not get into something if you're not going to do it right, so that you can be focused and laser sharp in what you do have. Because it's so predictive if you have accurate information, no matter what it is. Even if it's just basic information, you can still be very powerful with your very basic. But the more layers that you can have on top of that, internal or external data that you bring in, you can have dossiers for every person in your database. I mean, it can get overwhelming quickly. It's just the amount of it. And then what I believe Sheri had mentioned is the technology that we can use to manage it now. So there's lots of different applications that are even free that can help you get a picture of your database to, determine what steps I need to take. So yeah, it's just the amount of data would be my answer.
Yeah, I think something that you called out there, Chris, like the data is telling a story. You just have to know how to translate it and be in the weeds with it. Yeah. All right, Aaron, what changes have you seen in data management over the past years, and why is it important for nonprofits to start looking toward data?
Well, first I'll say Brian, Chris, and Sheri have nailed a lot of stuff. And on my team, in order not to repeat what smart people have already said, we associate ourselves with the comments of our colleagues. So I will do that. I think you all nailed it. And we'll echo what Sheri said about this really great combination of both impact data and fundraising data expertise on the panel. I'd say one of the major changes from when I started helping nonprofits with data is that staff have much better technology skills because we walk around with computers in our hands all day. So it's been a long time since I've tried to explain to someone how to put a web address in a browser window, and I really appreciate that. So just, a shout out to all of us for having better technology skills. And I agree, the tools are stronger, and the understanding of why has gone a whole lot deeper in the last decade than my funder says I have to give you this. So I think that's been a really good shift. And then I would say my perspective, especially for small organizations that aren't managing, big amounts of data, is that everything is data. How your staff are experiencing work in your program is data about how your mission is going to be effective or not. So it's really important that you know what you're doing, you know what the effects of those efforts are, in order to figure out whether you're having the impact you want to have, or you're just, showing up and grinding against a problem that you're not actually solving every day.
Yeah, getting that data from
You froze up, Hannah.
Yeah, it seems like Hannah's frozen.
Let's see.
Well,
Anton, do you want to join us? Yeah. Does anybody else, just as everybody, those of you who have joined the session, there is on the bottom of your screen, there is a questions tab and a chat tab. If you want to enter questions for us, until we get Hannah back or Anton joins us, we're happy to take questions. Yeah. Anton is asking us to give Hannah a couple of minutes. While we're waiting, I've done one of these panels before, and if any of you who would like, any of you participants who would like, if you want to put your name and the organization you're with, or the area of the nonprofit sector you work in, if you want to offer that on the side in the chat, we can take that. Here's Hannah.
Apologies for that, everyone. The internet connection just sometimes gets you. Well, kind of coming back in. Apologies for the momentary delay. I'll kind of move to our next question if everybody's ready for that. And Sheri, start with you. How can nonprofit organizations best use their data, and what are some best practices for data management and analysis? And we were kind of hitting on a lot of those points. Making sure that we're gathering it from different sides and being really focused. Excited to hear your best practices.
Sure. So I'm going to take it from the more impact management side, and I'll let Chris and Brian and Aaron, if they want to speak to the fundraising metrics side, because that's their expertise, not mine. But I always think that we need to start with the end in mind before we even start to collect any mission impact data. And so one of the best practices that I always recommend nonprofits start with is this really simple exercise, identifying why does their organization do what it does? Like, what is that? How are you changing lives and changing circumstances for those beneficiaries that receive your services? And once you do that, then you can drill down into what you should be measuring to prove that you're making those changes. So that's, I think, my number one best practice, which actually has nothing to do with data management and nothing to do with data analysis, but it makes it make more sense in terms of why are we collecting this information from our beneficiaries? Why is it important to look at it? And I also think another best practice measure for data management is making sure that you can tell 3 things about your nonprofit. You can talk about who do you serve and what do they look like? How well are you serving them? And how are they better off? And just some key and core elegant ways. And then you can use that and you can analyze those results to tell that story to your audiences and also use it to make decisions. So I'm sure Erin has other things to add to that. So I'm going to pause so she can, when it's her turn, she can build on that.
Well, I'll go ahead and direct it over to Erin. I love the kind of like just having those 3 things in your back pocket. A great place to start. So Erin, how can nonprofit professionals use their organization's data, and what are some best practice for that management and analysis?
Sure. Yep, Sheri, you nailed exactly where I would have started. And I think the thing that I will just dive a little farther into, especially for folks who are attending today, who are leaders of their organizations. And if you're not a leader and you just need some backup, send your bosses my way. It's really important for organizations to be really clear about staff data responsibilities and provide training so that everybody understands what they're doing, to build knowledge and skills, both formally and informally, for their staff, and to invest in systems that do the data work that you need. I think Chris and Brian could speak really well to this. Technology investment is not a one-time thing. Systems change all the time. You've got to keep your team up to date on the tools that you're using and why they're important. And then to really establish an organizational culture of learning, which means talking about the data you've got, and allowing those conversations to exist at every level of the organization, and not making those conversations more technical than they need to be, in particular when you're talking about impact data, so that your frontline folks who are actually doing the work every day feel like they understand why what they're collecting and using is connected also to the work that they're doing.
That's awesome. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, the why matters so much. All right, Chris, turning to you. What are some ways for nonprofit professionals to use their data, and what are the best strategies for managing that information?
So I have some, I'll just get right to it. So number 1 is have a set process and procedure guideline for anyone that's entering data. So, I've seen it hundreds of times where the addresses are inconsistent, and this happens, but trying to establish a consistent way of making sure that anyone that has access to the CRM that keeps track of the donors or any database, that it's all, streamlined and entered in the same way. And there are tools that help you just by typing in the zip code. It can populate certain thing, the address and zip code and zip +4. So set policies and procedures for how the data goes in. This is one I just wanted to mention because it comes up once a month. Someone looking to identify lost alumni, and then when they get the return mail back, they delete the address, or it was deleted, so we don't have an old address to go by. So never delete old information like contact information. Always save it as an alternate or last known. Just even though you're not going to use it, if you know that if you send a mail to that address, it's not going to get to that person. If that person's ever lost, and that old information helps companies like us to identify where they are today. So keeping that old contact information is helpful. Another one that I would hear when I was at Blackbaud for a while, it just came up often. I just wanted to mention it, like constituent codes and attributes, try to minimize those. Like if you're gonna add a new constituent code, ask yourself, why am I adding this? Is it really needed? What is it gonna be used for segmentation purposes? Is there already a code in there that is like this that I can just use instead of adding a new one. Because over time, the databases you just have so many fields to pull data from, and you're not sure what's important and it's just hard to segment the data. Run NCOA quarterly, whether it's with us, anyone else, doing it with and that's the National Change of Address system. So anybody that moves, they have to go to the post office, do it online or at the post office and say, I moved to this address. And so there's different types. It can go back anywhere from 12 months to 48 months, which is the maximum. I recommend to do it quarterly, every 3 months, run it through NCOA. We could help you with that. Your mail house doesn't count because most times they don't send back the new address to the nonprofit. They're just like, you send us the data. Yeah, we ran it through NCOA for you. You're good. And then you really have no idea who got how many, out of those 10,000 pieces or whatever, how many actually got delivered to the right address. So, and then the last one is just maintaining a proper database, keeping it updated. And I was going to mention that we run a report that's complimentary that can look at your database. You send us all the individuals in your system, the name, the address, contact information, and we'll analyze it and tell you, out of these, here's how many phone numbers, cell phones, landlines, how many ages, deceased people that you have in your database that we can give you new information. So your information isn't correct. We can provide new addresses, phone numbers, and then here's how many people or data points we confirm for each one of those contact points. And so it's free. It doesn't change anything. It just provides you with this nice report. And it's good ammunition to use if you're having a difficult time getting things approved to make the updates that need to happen, but you just can't convince the powers that be to get the funding to make that, to help you get those updates made. These reports are pretty powerful. But yeah, that's just a few tidbits of things that I've heard to maybe helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome, Chris. I think there's a lot of really, really practical to-dos that everyone can implement today. I think what really stood out to me was not deleting old addresses. I think that's something that that is good to keep in mind for moving forward. All right, Brian, anything that you like to add for best practices, making the most of your data?
Yeah, I'll pick up. I think the ladies have spoken well to the impact thing, and I think Chris spoke well to the data, the detail. Yeah, remember a couple things. As Chris mentioned earlier, there are layers of data, but the base layer is that home address. That home address is central to everything, and again, a prior address, in addition to NCOA, for at least 4 years, 48 months, possibly getting you an update. Credit data will forever give you an update if you have a prior address. If you've never looked at your own credit file, it's fun to do. You should do it. Most of your credit card companies will offer you the opportunity. But I'm someone who moved to the United States from Canada, but I've been living in the States for over 25 years now. And it's interesting. I can enter any address I've ever had in the United States, and I will see every address I've ever had in the United States on my credit file. So that's how we find you. That's how skip trace companies find people with bad debt. That's in many ways, that's how we can help you find people. So don't ever get rid of an old address. Chris is absolutely right there. And then there are layers on that. Anyone doing a wealth screening for you, any of the many companies that'll do a wealth screening for you will tell you the bare minimum is name and a home address, Going on from there, more data is, and we've all discovered this, as we've heard Aaron say, we're all carrying computers in our pockets. Our ability to store data is incredible now. So it's important that we collect more information. And sometimes the more information doesn't just help us know about what we might want to ask somebody for, or how much we might want to ask somebody. Sometimes it'll help us with the research that's done and help us confirm it's correct or not. I've lived a number of places in the United States. I've been in Texas now, in Houston for over 20 years. But in all the different places I've lived in Canada and the United States, I rarely found Lacey's, so my name has no E in it. That's unusual. Most Lacey's have an E. I finally get to Houston, and not only are almost all the Lacey's without an E, but there are 2 other Bryans. So the potential for mismatch is there, you know, and I know it happens because I get veterans mail from one of the Bryans who was a veteran. I get all kinds of stuff from Scholastica and educational organizations for principals because the other one is a principal. You know, so these mistakes happen, but quite frankly, there's only one Brian Lacey who's married to Lisa Kopis. And there's only one Brian Lacey who works at Brian Lacey and Associates. So multiple pieces of data help us make exact matches. Again, when you can bring things together like that, you create a database that's more powerful. And we're learning, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that some people like me with white hair still like to write checks. Lots of people who are 30 years younger than me would rather give online. You know, my wife's only 5 years younger than me, and she does everything online, and I still write checks. I still pay the water bill with a check. I still pay the electricity bill with a check. I still go into the branch and interact with the teller. So learn about your constituents, take advantage of the fact that we can store enormous amounts of data. And then, of course, the $10 donor, maybe you only need to store 100 fields of data. The $1 million prospect, maybe you want 5,000 pieces of data. You know, that's just being reasonable and taking advantage of technology.
Yeah, I love how you answered that question, Brian, because I think that sets us up really well for our next question. Is we've covered there is so much data out there, and we really need to like focus and have a strategy. But Chris, I'm going to start this next question with you. So as you're kind of looking at all the information that you have, what questions should nonprofit professionals ask themselves when they're deciding what they want to focus on with their data?
First question is what you want to accomplish. Like, before you can analyze anything, you need to know what your goal is, what your outcome, what success is going to look like once I found this group, and what are they going to do. And then the next is, based on that, do I currently have anybody that is already doing that? You know, if I'm looking for major donors or like mid-level, 1,000 to, whether it be 1,000 to 2,500, let's just say that's a certain group. If you're looking to identify more of those people that are, giving lower, see what the common characteristics are with that one group. That wasn't the best example, but it's just, if you're looking to analyze something, you want to identify, first ask your question, what's the end goal? So, and then based on that, are there any other people that fit that profile? And then what characteristics do they have? All right. And then based on what characteristics those people have in common, are there any other people in the pool of, in the database that look like that? And some of this you can do internally. And then some, obviously, you have external companies that can help you. But it really starts with that one question, what you need, what's your end goal. But there's some basic things that you need to know as well. I mean, you need to make sure you have confidence that the data is accurate and up to date. And then once you get this group of people, how are you going to communicate, engage with them? So do you have phone, if you're calling them, do you have those phone numbers, cell phones? Are those good? You can do all this good stuff and have this great list of people that you think are perfect. And then now they're going to the phone-a-thon or, the major gift officers, and they're going to try to meet with, and there's bad information or bad home addresses, or just some oversight that you didn't think about. But making sure however you're going to engage is you have that information. And then that's pretty much it. I kind of hit all three of them. So
yeah, I think knowing what you're using it for, and being really intentional about that strategy is really important. Chris, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you at the end?
No, that was it. That question was just, it kind of makes me just always fall back on, before I can, decide on what I should analyze, you need to decide on what the goal is.
Right.
And then go from there.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Aaron, on to you. how can nonprofits determine what data they should analyze?
Well, luckily, it's the same is true with impact data as it is with fundraising data. And Sheri, I think, said this in the introduction. You really do have to know what you're trying to accomplish. That question of, what are we doing is really important. I think as we get more specific, some advice that I have, especially for resource-strapped organizations, and I think most nonprofits are in some way, is not to collect any more data than you really need to collect. Don't get expansive in what you want to know. Collect what you absolutely need. And so asking that question, what matters most for the work we're trying to do, is really important. Sheri said this more simply, but I think an organization that can take the time either internally or can find some external help to really walk through a process of developing a theory of change makes a really big difference in long-term data quality. So, that would be a process that really walks you through what need are we addressing, what activities do we engage in to address that need, how can we measure that we're executing on the activities? So are those things happening, and are they happening with a level of quality that we can measure with qualitative data, interviews, those kinds of things? And then what outcomes do we expect as a result? And the truth is, in all of those, that when you get down to a granular level of data, it can be a whole lot of data points to answer one simple question. And so keeping your questions at the minimum things that you really need to know helps. I think if you think about this question with the word analyze in mind, I would also say that it's really important, especially if you're doing direct service work with people. So I think about, programs with young people who are participants. If you have a hunch about why something isn't going well, don't let that hunch take you too far down a path of believing that's the case if you don't do some data analysis to figure it out. So one good thing to think about when you're trying to decide what to analyze is, what do people think is going on here? And can the data help us either prove ourselves right or disprove ourselves so that we can actually get to the root cause of what our challenge might be?
Yeah, Erin, not letting your hunch take you too far in the wrong direction, I think is sound advice for nonprofit management and just life. Always being ready to investigate and use the data that we have. All right, Brian, I'll kind of pose this one to you as well. What should nonprofit organizations keep in mind when choosing what data to include and analyze? You're muted, I believe.
I'll take it to directly to some of the things I do with my clients every day. So I have a client that says to me, hey, we've got 150,000 records, 150,000 people who donated last year. You're talking to us about building a matching gift program. We understand that we need to know where people work, because if we know where they work, we'll know whether or not they're matching gift eligible or not. The problem is, at 30 cents a record, we don't have $45,000 to append employment information to the whole file, or we don't have $15,000. So I go back to them and I say, okay, I understand you've got 150,000 records. Can you please look and tell me how much of last year's charitable donations were made by 20,000 of your 150,000? And they come back and they're like, 90% of the money came from the top 20,000. I said, okay, can we talk about an employer append for 20,000 people? Because it's going to cover 90% of your giving. Similarly, they'll come back and say, we've got 100,000 records, Brian, and we're talking to Stelter or some other company about planned giving, and golly, we don't know how to tackle this. I'll say, well, what you can read about in the internet, and we'll talk to you about the fact that fewer than 2% of people under the age of 60 make a planned gift. Now, should we be talking to people sooner and preparing them? Yes. But if your budget is strapped and only 2% of people under the age of 60 make planned gifts, how many people in your database are over 60? They come back and they say, oh, it's only 17%. Okay. So it sounds like you need date of birth information on 17,000 records, not 100,000 records, because those are the ones that you're actually going to talk to about planned gifts, and those are the ones you need date of birth data for, right? So again, focus, right? What are we doing? And then, of course, every fall, I have clients who come and say, oh my God, how much is it going to cost to do a phone append on all my records? And I said, that depends. Do you intend to actually call all your records? Well, no, we've scaled back our phone-a-thon. We've only got 6 stations. I said, how many calls can you complete in 6 stations? They're like, well, we can complete about 30,000 calls and actually reach about 5,000 people. I said, how about we put cell phone data on your top 30,000 prospects? And you don't worry about 150,000 prospects because you're not going to get to calling them anyway. Now, I understand if I would modify that to say, hey, if they're major gift prospects and things, make sure they're included and so forth. But my point is, you can look and say, as the ladies have said and Chris have said, what are we doing? But I'm taking it down to the project. If it's planned giving and I want to talk to people about planned gifts, chances are I only want to talk to 17% of my file. If it's matching gifts and I need employment data, chances are I can look at 15 or 20% of my file and cover 90% of the gifts that were made last year. There are things in my phone-a-thon, I'm not going to call everybody, so I don't need to have everybody's cell phone number. And all of these things are reflecting. I have these conversations with my clients because unfortunately the nonprofit sector is underfunded. Okay, so I just say that. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's awesome, Brian. I think using your data to know how to use your data, like using the data to kind of create that data strategy, it comes from all kind of sources and in different situations. All right, Sheri, kind of turning back to the impact data. What should nonprofits consider when they're choosing which data to use and analyze?
Absolutely. So I'm going to build on everything everyone said because I agree wholeheartedly. But I think one of the key points that everyone said, and I'll reiterate, is you want to know how you're going to use it. And so the 2 questions I would ask myself, because we can get in analysis paralysis, we can have too much data that we don't know what to do with it. So ask yourself before you even start to ask your staff to track something or go pay, someone to gather that data for you, is ask yourself, how will this help us tell our story? And if you don't know how you're going to put it into a campaign or into a grant or talk to a potential donor about it, then maybe you don't need to collect it. And then the second question you should ask yourself is, will we be able to make our programs better because of this information that we're getting? And that's why I started out talking about the 3 types of data: the what have you done, who have you served, what have you done, how well have you done it, and how people are better off. When you have that information, especially on a individual record level, then you can do similar, totally for different reason, but similar type of analyses that Brian is talking about, where you can say, you know what, if we increase family engagement by 2 sessions, we're going to increase their outcomes tenfold. But you can only do that type of analysis and only get really smart with efficient and effective programs if you are able to know kind of the demographic characteristics about who you serve, the dose of intervention, and the results that they're getting at an individual level. And I think the biggest mistake that nonprofits make is that they do not collect data on an individual level. They collect data on an aggregate level. And that's one thing that SureImpact we're trying to eliminate, is to give people that insight at that individual level so they can make really smart intervention decisions. And so I think that's one thing that I'd say, make sure when you think about analysis, get at the individual level record as much as possible to help with telling that story and looking at how you can use this data to make better programs and more impactful programs.
For sure. Yeah, I think asking yourself that question, how is this going to help tell our story? I think, Chris, that calls back to something that you mentioned earlier. But I think, yeah, the data is in service of the story, which is your message and your mission. So this is going to be the last one of my questions before I'll open it up to questions from the audience. So go ahead and start submitting those via the chat or the question tab, and go ahead and do it right now. But I'll kind of start before we dive in there. Our final question here. So Aaron, I'll have you start with this one. As nonprofit professionals are looking toward the future, what metrics should they be taking into consideration and why?
Great. I just get to say how smart I think Sheri is. So I just, for me, this answer is, it goes back to that individual data. I think more programs need to be disaggregating data by race, ethnicity, income, gender, any other participant characteristics that are really important to the constituents that you're serving. The disaggregation can really advance the question of whether your program is equitable. It can reveal disparities that may be hidden by the aggregate data, and really start to highlight some of the root causes of those disparities to figure out how you can ensure that you're serving the people who are showing up for your services as best as possible. So I would just say to folks, if your current data methods don't allow for that, it's something to really spend the time doing, and then to be sure that you're helping the recipients of your services understand why you might want them to be self-reporting this data about themselves. Just recognizing that it is sensitive data, and you can't just go guessing that you know what someone's identity is. You really have to ask and do that. So just want to underscore the importance of that data. And I think it's always been important, but if it's not something you're doing, it's a great thing to really be aiming for in the future.
Yeah, I really appreciate you calling that out, Aaron. The disaggregation as a step toward more equitable data and not making assumptions about data. Great things for nonprofits to put into practice moving forward, and if they haven't already. Brian, looking ahead, what metrics should nonprofit organizations prioritize and why?
Well, yeah, I think obviously we've got sort of the two sides to this, and we need to be managing both. I'll speak a little more to the fundraising side, because the ladies have spoken more to the impact side, and I think that is important. I'll just say one thing about the impact side. It's interesting, there's an organization I recently began volunteering for, and it's in Texas. It's called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. So it's mostly white-haired guys like me going into prisons and evaluating business plans that prisoners are working on, and there are a selected group of prisoners that are then mentored over the course of the final 2 years of their prison sentences. And anyway, long story short, the impact is recidivism amongst graduates in this program is less than 7%. Recidivism across the prison population is almost 40%. So, and then of course we said, well, wait a second, maybe that's because we selected better candidates for our program. But in fact, because of a variety of things, people getting early release, people being moved from one prison to another, there are people that have been selected but don't actually complete the program, and their recidivism, that control group, is actually 40% as well. So it's like, just kind of an interesting. So and when I got involved with this charity because of that story. What that said to me was real impact. So I was like, then I'll volunteer, So it is important. On the data side, I think we're going to continue to track, and there is a movement afoot to be more broad-based. I guess because I'm a silver-haired person, I still think there's a little bit of an argument to be made for, why do bank robbers rob banks? Because that's where the money is. In our society today, most of the money is with a relatively small percentage of the population. So obviously, I'm going to still encourage my clients to look within their databases for the people with the most capacity, the most demonstrated philanthropy, and we're going to work to build programs from then. Again, hoping that we can eventually broaden out our program as budgets allow by inviting everybody to participate in. But that's going to typically be done digitally. Most of the personal work is going to, the major gift work, the principal gift work is ultimately going to be done with people capable of making gifts of that level. So we're going to focus on those people.
Awesome, Brian. I think that story is really good for demonstrating the connection that we've been talking about is between impact data and donor supporter data. It's all about using it to tell a story, like Sheri was saying earlier. Well, with that in mind, Sheri, going into 2023, what data should nonprofit organizations collect to better understand the impact of their organization's efforts?
Yeah, so Brian couldn't have teed up my answer any better. So if you want to tell the story that Brian just told, so you can get Brian to volunteer or donate to your organization, guess what? You need to start collecting that information today, because most interventions, you don't know it immediately, right? You have to actually track that individual from when they began your program to when they finish the intervention and see how they've changed. So that data collection could take up to 6 months to a year to really talk about the impact of your programs. And so, when nonprofits have been kicking this conversation down the can for whatever reason, Great Resignation, COVID, whatever has been going on in the organization so far, and saying we're too overwhelmed to commit to measuring impact. Well, now you're a year behind and able to tell that story. And, whether we like it or not, there's a good chance that donations are going to get a lot harder to get in the next year because of inflation, because of the economy tightening. And it's going to be even more important for you to tell your impact story. And so, I'm on a soapbox. I'm really passionate about this, but it's like the time is now, people, because if we don't start measuring the impact and the outcomes of our programs and services, you can't tell that story. You can tell a nice story, but you can't prove it. And that's going to make all the difference in the funding cycles coming up in the next several months.
Yeah, go ahead, do it. Don't put it off.
Yeah.
Don't put it off. Don't wait until 2023. Start now. All right, Chris, any other metrics that you think nonprofit professionals should focus on moving forward, and why?
So there's 2 data points that I've heard over time that I thought were kind of interesting that may jump off the page to the people listening, so they may not be new to them, but help to identify major gift prospects. And so I thought I'd toss these out. The first one is a widow. So anybody that has lost a loved one potentially could be a great major gift prospect. If they have that affinity to the organization already, they may want to support their husband or wife's university that they were so, enthusiastic about, even though they didn't go there. So there's a number of reasons. And unfortunately, there's a lot more than there were a couple of years ago, just due to COVID and, we've all been impacted. So just wanted to mention that data point, because that one was kind of, it's touchy, but it's just one to, it's a data point that, the better your donors, especially if they're going to be a major gift prospect, you need to know that, you need to develop that relationship. So the other one is for universities and colleges, dual degrees. So if somebody graduated with more than 1 degree, they may not have been in many clubs or anything because they're probably studying the entire time, but it's one that just didn't, jump off the page at me. I thought it was pretty interesting that they typically have a pretty decent affinity to make a large gift. So, whether they just graduated a couple of years ago and they're still in their 20s, I would definitely start building those relationships with those young alumni that have dual degrees, just, making sure their contact information is good, all of that. And then as you go into the future, if you're not considering this now, we offer these services, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. I think I'm excited about it. But AccuData, our parent company, provides digital marketing services to for-profit organizations and some nonprofits. But we at Alumni Finder have now brought all those internally. I mean, we're basically using those services to help nonprofits. So what they're doing, it sounds really complicated and expensive, but it's not. One of my favorite services called Geofence Targeting. So you're basically layering this marketing component over a campaign that you're running, and whether it be a phone-a-thon, a walk, a direct mail, and we can help by delivering targeted ads or just information. It's not asking for gifts, it's just talking about the walk or the event that's coming up, or just more about the nonprofit in general to those households that are going to be receiving that direct mail piece or that phone call, or be asked to participate in the walk. So you kind of get ahead of this and have this as a component of that campaign that's targeting those more likely donors out of that group that you're sending out. You may not target all of them, but you're just targeting them at the household. So it really drives engagement, increases the exposure of the campaign. Whereas before, it's just kind of obvious. If you're not doing that, you can do well, but this is another layer that can really help explode that, the reach of that, whatever it is you're doing. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Well, with all of these answers in mind, we haven't had any questions come in via the question tab, but a few questions were submitted ahead of time through registration. And Aaron, you mentioned this earlier about learning and using data within your organization for learning. So would you speak a little bit more to that about how data can be used for learning and improvement?
Sure, and would love to tag Sheri in on this one as well. I think, it really does. I worked for an organization that thought it was a learning organization for a really long time, but it turned out it was really just a very ideological organization. There were people who really believed in what they were doing, and so they were sure it worked. And my job was to show the data that indicated some gaps in that truth. And so one thing I would say is really important is that leaders who want to learn really trust in the data, either to be telling the truth or to be inaccurate in a way that means you've got to go figure out what's wrong with it. So one really important way to become a learning organization is to believe the data in one way or the other and not just toss it out if it doesn't tell you what you want it to tell you. I also think it's really important to create a culture where the data is not used to penalize the staff's performance, but to really bring people along into trying new things. I think the other, the second side of learning is improving. And it's really important to understand that if you learn that you are not meeting an outcome that you've set for the organization, it's not likely that you're going to go from a very low level of performance to a really high level of performance quickly. You've got to set targets that are reasonable and move you along a path to success, and to really test out strategies to make change in small chunks. So we at Root Cause help organizations use continuous quality improvement strategies that have really come to the nonprofit sector from the manufacturing sector and from the medical sector in some ways, to really get engaged in small cycles of getting better at things. So we do that through cycles where you plan, you do, you study, and you act, and you're not trying to do anything major in a 6-week period of time. You're really sort of biting off the things you can actually change. What can I do by next Tuesday is something that I heard a really smart person say about sort of learning from your data and figuring out what to do next. So really learning how to make small changes over time that are grounded in the data, rather than sort of throwing the whole thing out and trying something brand new that you aren't sure is going to work either.
Yeah. The breaking things into small achievable chunks is really good. So many good things in there. Thank you, Aaron.
Well, Hannah, one of the things that Aaron touched on, and I wrote it down at the beginning and meant to say it earlier and didn't, is we're all assuming, I think all of us would agree that the organizations where everybody's at the table, including the data people, always perform better. And that's improved as well. I was thinking about that at the beginning because that was one of the things that I was going to say that I think has improved. It's still not universal, though. And the organizations that I have the most difficulty helping are the ones where I'm having a conversation with the executive director, and then they get a little ways along, they can't answer any of my questions about the data. And then I say, is there any way we could have a meeting with the person who manages the database? Oh, well, I just want to figure things out, Brian, and then we'll bring them in and they'll, and I'm like, they could help us. And they could, again, Chris spoke to some of the things. We have a process as well, a file view process that looks at files and tells us and allows us to tell our clients at no charge what we can do for them. But again, there's probably somebody in the organization who should be at the table. And so I'm hoping that as a future trend is that more and more we see the entire organization as important to the success of the organization and delivering impact, and we bring everybody in, because when we, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work, and there you lose all hope of optimization, because I think a lot of us are hoping to optimize what meager resources we might have. You lose it when half the people that should be at the table are not at the table.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to call out, Brian. Well, I appreciate everyone coming to the panel today, and such a huge thank you to our panelists, Sheri, Chris, Aaron, and Brian. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and a lot of good takeaways for us to use moving forward to make sure that the story we're telling is the story that is backed up by the data, and that we're using the data and being really intentional when we're collecting it to share that message, to connect with donors and supporters and volunteers, and really communicate the impact that the organization has had. I love that we had both sides of this in this data conversation, and how they're really tied together and serve each other. So we've got a packed kind of fall of panels ahead of us still, and I hope you'll join us for more of them if you are here today, and share them, because we've got several coming up on strengthening your grant proposals, peer-to-peer best practices for nonprofits, strategies for your nonprofit leadership team, and more. So keep an eye out on the NXUnite website or the NXUnite LinkedIn page to make sure you don't miss any of those. Registration is already open, so go ahead and sign up. And in our last minute, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out some information to you after this panel, including a survey that we really appreciate you filling out. That's speaking of data, one of the data points that we collect to make sure that this is a great experience moving forward for everyone attending the panel. And we want to hear what you're looking for in more panels like this one. It's been a pleasure speaking with all of you. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.